Okay. So I'm very sorry about this. I presume most of you are now left. So basically, there were 4 areas I wanted to cover. One was information architecture and UX, looking at that in terms of module 2, and then looking at tooling. For those of you who, if you can hear me, sorry, it's just my laptop is giving issues. If you can hear me, please just let me know that you can hear me in the live chat. That'll be very helpful. Okay, cool. And then if hold on, if you can't hear me, please check your own PC Mac first. Okay, cool. All right, so using Hangouts now. So the 3 things we want to look at were information architecture and UX, tooling, product use contexts, and persona and archetypal development. In terms of information architecture and user experience, I think that's something that's very important to tie together and understand the collaboration between those two. In the first 2 modules, there was a lot of discussion around tooling. There was a lot of anxiety about whether or not someone should use Pencil or use Balsamiq or use Axure RP or use Adobe XD or whichever tool one would suggest. And there's obviously also a lot of excitement at the moment around InVision Studio. What I tried to convey in this run of the course, and really it's what I've always tried to convey, is that tooling is something that is not going to be a permanent thing. I mean, the things that are popular at one moment in time, a few years later, something else will be popular. So I really I want to encourage you to think about it slightly differently in terms of tooling. Tooling is the tool you choose to use at a particular moment in time. It's not something that's a permanent fixture to your career as a UX professional. There's a lot of, in terms of the course and in terms of tooling, there are a lot of students who often want to use Axure RP. And I'd like to strongly encourage anyone who's thinking of doing that to not use it. In the forums, I went on at quite a bit of length as to why I feel this should be the case. And when I say don't use it, I mean don't use it in the context of the course. So it's obviously a very, very popular tool. It's used in a lot of different contexts. It is extremely useful if one is collaborating across disparate areas with also different types of teams, including business analysts, product owners, developers. The learning curve of Axure is very high. It's very steep. It's a very steep learning curve. The other thing that makes it not necessarily suitable for the course, it's difficult to learn in the short space of time that you'd need to, is that Axure, its output is oriented towards a particular way of wireframing, a particular way of doing clickable prototypes that is about long-term minimization of total cost of ownership. So wireframes that come out of Axure that are not being prepared by people who are familiar and deeply experienced with Axure often end up looking and lacking the level of detail that one would otherwise be able to achieve in something like Pencil or Balsamiq, or for that matter, on a drawn piece of paper. At the same time, we have the challenge where, for those of you who are coming from a graphic design or a web design background, or indeed any access to Adobe Creative Cloud, there's obviously been a lot of promotion around the Adobe XD tool. And so many of you are wanting to use that as your primary wireframing tool as we go through the course. And I certainly can't tell you that I wouldn't use it. I think it's very, very useful, particularly around mobile applications and doing logical flows between things. But, excuse me, in my experience, and also with the UX team in my firm, we found that just because something is free or included in Adobe doesn't necessarily mean it's the right tool for the job. So I think where Adobe tends to fall a little bit short is that a lot of users try, and a lot of people who use it tend to overemphasize certain parts of the certain parts of the experience and end up doing high fidelity prototypes, which if you're a designer, you might think, oh, well, this is really a great thing. But the point of a wireframe is that we can iterate quickly and make changes quickly. And in my experience, when one starts putting high fidelity wireframes together, the result is that you don't have the time to actually make the changes that you need to. And you might, you're prematurely designing, and I think that's something I'd like to encourage you guys to avoid. And the danger with Adobe Suite, where there's tight integration between Illustrator, Photoshop, and the like, is that you'll always have that temptation to start bringing in the aesthetic earlier than you possibly should, before you really got into the essence of what the product you are designing for users is. Similarly, there's obviously very popular tooling around things like Sketch and Zeppelin. Again, I think there's exciting promise in Zeppelin as far as the collaborative tool is concerned. But again, the layers of complexity and the feature sets of these products possibly, almost certainly, are resulting in a possibility for confusion, but B, it's also presenting the challenge where you are potentially going to have yourself distracted from what you're really trying to achieve. What you're really trying to achieve is a strong understanding of how to take your research, to take your hypothesis, to take your product use context, to take your personas, to take your archetypes and apply them to a product set. And if one's learning all the fiddly features of one feature or one platform or another, you're distracting yourself from the essence of what you're really trying to do, which is develop an enduring set of skills around user experience, and not have them be and not have them, you're not learning how to use Adobe XD, for example, or you're not learning how to use Zeppelin. You're trying to learn what's the principle of a wireframe and how can I use it effectively. I'm quite sure my frustrating morning with Google's live streaming with inside YouTube was heavily, I'm sure Exo was used and all sorts of tools were used, but it's an absolutely terrible user experience. Maybe possibly what I should do is put together a video on just how confusing that this platform is and how it's led. So tooling, I think, really, I want to encourage you, even setting aside something like Balsamiq, just buy yourself an A3 block of paper, get yourself some Sharpie pens, some pencils, good ruler, and start getting used to just drawing ideas very, very quickly, conveying ideas very, very quickly, because that's ultimately where I think you can add a lot of value to yourself and to what you're doing. So let me just give you an example here. So let me just, I'm going to fire up a tool here called iExplain. Okay. Let's just stop and let's share a different thing here. So, bring this up quickly. All right, screen share. Why is this not showing? Okay, my entire screen. Share. Okay. So, bearing in mind that I'm working on a touch-sensitive screen, rather than worrying about like, well, what's the perfect tool and so on and so forth, it's better to start saying, okay, cool. Well, if I'm going to do a wireframe or an information architecture, I'm going to understand that, let's say, my application is going to go through 3 states. I'm going to have a login screen. It's going to flow into, let's say, maybe my dash. And then possibly my dash is going to go into a variety of different pages. So I need to know what each of those different things are. Possibly from my login screen, I've got to deal with forgot password. And then what I generally do in the case of this is I'd say, okay, cool, well, that's 1, that's 1.1, that's 2. So if anything comes off there, it would be 2.1, 2.2, and so on and so forth. This might be, let's say this was a system where I was going to capture something, capture a lead, let's say. Sorry, I'm just not using the tablet on a hard surface, so it's bouncing around a little bit. So 3, 3.2, and so on and so forth. So that kind of already becomes something that's then useful for me to action and say, all right, cool. You know, what's the next step of my life? Just going to wipe this. In fact, let's surely I can just clear this. Right. Let me go to okay. There we are. There we go. That's a sketch like lurking around. So then maybe what I do is I say, all right, fine. So for one, my login screen, what am I going to need? I'm going to need my logo. I'm going to need a username. It's going to have to be a field. It has to be a password. It's going to be a field. There's going to be a sign-in button. And then maybe a forgot password link. And then maybe there's other things that I might need to add. I might need to add things like a register and so on and so forth. So the thing is, for me to just quickly knock out a form and kind of say, all right, cool, these are the elements that I'm going to need. And then this, for example, would be, you know, login. I shouldn't necessarily be worrying about my tooling. I should just be saying, okay, cool, this is something that I want to do. This is something that I want to convey. I'm concerned that I didn't share that that screen. I think it has gone through with the share, so that's good. So I think, you know, those are important elements to take into consideration. And in terms of the product use context, I think a lot of people get super anxious about how they would like it all to run. The truth of the matter is that your product use context needs to be as much information that you have at the time of you preparing it. I think importantly, another thing to consider and be aware of is to say, all right, cool. How much do I know about the product use context at that moment in time? And it's normally a jumping off point for further research. So for you to effectively say, what more can I learn about this particular system? What more can I learn about who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, where is it going to be used? What are the limitations? What are the constraints? What are the opportunities? What are the threats around the system? So we talk about product use context, but it's really, I mean, you could call it whatever you want. I mean, ultimately, it's the landscape in which the software is going to be used. So the reason why we're encouraging that early in the thought process is to understand that not all systems are used in all contexts. So, so for instance, if I'm going to build a user interface that's going to live inside an airplane, where it's going to be on the back panel of an airplane seat, I need to know that I'm not going to have a keyboard, and therefore that's a massive constraint in terms of the system. It's touchscreen only. Whereas at the same time, you know, I might have a different product use context where I know, for instance, that the users are going to have a low literacy rate, which means I need to have meaningful iconography, and then I need to consider the ethical and the ethnic and the cultural stereotypes of what certain iconography means, and we'll be encountering that in later modules. So the product use context is to provide us an opportunity to think through a structured way of unpacking what needs to be used. Traditionally, for those people who don't come with a lot of technical experience, the one often question or concern is, well, what is the right technology for me to choose? And in that sense, you've got to kind of make a informed guesstimation. So you've got to say, well, I know that there's this thing called PHP, or I know that there's this thing called .NET or Java or Ruby or Go or whatever. I know that there's something called, you know, HTML, and therefore I have to learn that there are these different things that in which digital products can be built. So if you're someone who's not experienced, and this course is a first opportunity to sort of immerse yourself in that, I would really encourage you to say, in every single one of the elements of the product use context, particularly the technical, if you don't know what these things could be built in, then you're not necessarily going to know what's good for what. And as a user experience practitioner, it's important to know just as much the tooling that we care about for our day-to-day job. It's important to know what others are using. So that's everything from what a project manager might use. So is he or she using Microsoft Project, or they're using Hub Planner? What are they using to plan the project? To the business people, what accounting package are they using? How are the revenues being collected? What is the payment gateway? If we're going to create an application that takes a credit card swipe, where does that come from? That's all important to then say, okay, cool. The designers, what tools are they going to be using? Oh, well, the thing's going to be, developed in something like Corel Draw versus something more contemporary, such as Illustrator or Photoshop. Those are all important questions. We're wanting to get into all the different ways, not only in which the product is going to be used by the end user, but all the people who are going to end up using the product in its creation. And I think often that's the counterintuitive thing is, yes, the product use context that we are covering early on in this course is kind of saying very, very end user centric. But if you really consider what we're actually wanting to do is to get a survey and a landscape over all the different people who may be using the system in many, many different ways. Then onto like sort of personas and archetypal development. Some of you were kind of like concerned about how we develop those and around some of the notes that they weren't necessarily clear on when do we develop user personas and archetypical development. I think you'll see in the coming 3 and 4 and 5 that as we explore our hypotheses and our research work and flesh that out, it becomes more and more apparent that the user persona needs to be established. And I think there's a lot of value in that. If any of you want to ask any questions in the live chat, please do go ahead and I'll answer them. I'm very, very sorry about this morning's frustrating start. I actually sat down at about 9:15 to start prepping the session, and was frustrated to discover that offline broadcast studio or open source broadcast studio wasn't working on my laptop, which previously has worked really well because it allows me to blend video and my drawing pad and the stuff that we see on the forum. So I apologize. I will get that all sorted out, and we'll possibly can have a little bit of a rework of this maybe in the middle of the week or next week Sunday. I'm very, very sorry about that. Cool, thanks, Dennis. I see you've asked a question. Sometimes I'm unable to contribute until Sunday due to commitments and other unforeseen circumstances. Not of my time. I'm just wondering when this means I'll get marked down. Cool, Dennis. I think you've raised a very important point. I think there's been a lot of consternation. We've got quite a big group this time with 60 people doing the course, which is wonderful. It's awesome, and it means that we've got lots of small groups operating, and I think already there's great energy in the class. One of the beauties of online learning is that we get the opportunity to sort of batter our time around. I would, if your calendar is only really allowing you to contribute on a Sunday, it's certainly not something that's going to mark you down. But for those of you who are getting involved in the small group forums earlier, I want to say firstly a very big thank you, because that helps create the space for more people to comment, and I think that's a really, really important part of what we need to do. Some people in the class, I mean, so the way the rubric marking works means that it's if you just meet the criteria, you actually end up with a score of 67%, which can be a bit disappointing. So what I wanted to say about the small groups is I really so maybe to just give a little bit more of an insight into how I mark it. So step one is obviously I'm looking at reading and here and there participating in the small group discussions, although the goal really is for you guys to bounce off one another and for me not to really like lead the discussion too much. And then generally on the Monday night, I will read through where everything is in the forums, do an initial impression, mark, and then when the Tuesday final results are in and kind of the forums close, I take a snapshot of the forums at that moment in time, just to make sure that no one tries to sneak in any further comments after that might then end up being marked. And then on the Wednesday, from the Wednesday to the Friday, I will mark the small groups based on the summary submissions and then what's happened in the submission. I did point out earlier and in the general discussions, that for me, it's actually, I'm looking for something pretty simple. Okay, I need you to, number one, bring something original into the forum. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be tremendously long. It needs to be some new material into the small discussion forum, something where you've done some reading, some thinking that you're applying to the discussion topic, not just regurgitating what everyone else has done. Number two, so that's essentially proposing an idea. Then I need you to address someone else's initial proposal. So, for instance, if you're the first person on the forum, which I don't think is Dennis's problem, but if you're the first person on the forum, the person who then you should be responding to is my initial posting. From there, after a certain amount of time, there should be enough positive new matter and enough commentary for a while. And then at that point, sorry, my battery's running low. And then at that point, you want to synthesize and bring those together. And that synthesis post, so that third post, can either, or ideally in the forum for others to further comment on and expand on. So how do you get 100% on small groups forums? Pretty simple. You need to address the topic with some new matter. You need to comment on explicitly the positive matter of someone else in the class. You need to analyze your matter and the matter of others in the small group and come to a conclusion. And you need to provide references and you need to cite the examples, the people, the posts that have resulted in your conclusion. So if you do those four things, you will get 100% every single time. Another rule of thumb is obviously the people who are very actively involved in forums, they give themselves more of an opportunity to sort of meet those four criteria. However, I can tell you that I have had students who make their first post on a Thursday, they find 10 minutes to do it. On the Saturday, they find 10 minutes, just reply to someone else's posting. On the Monday, they bring it all together, and on the Thursday, and then on the Tuesday, they do their summary posting. They've only essentially done 3 postings in a summary, and they get 100%. So it's not something that needs to it needs to be preliminary, but the sequence of when those 4 things happen, I don't care about when it happens in the week. I obviously do want to encourage you to do it earlier, because we have had instances where if a particular small group's not functioning well, then we might cite it and say, come on, guys, you need to actually engage with us a little bit sooner, because otherwise it's too difficult and it's not working out. I hope that's answered your question, because I think that, I think there's a lot of concern about that. But the function of the small group forum is for you to practice the proposal of new information, the criticism by someone else, and then the synthesis of that criticism along with your original idea. Because I think that's something in practice which you will having to do a lot of the time as a UX practitioner. When you analyze a problem, you're going to have to say, we've decided to make this happen in terms of the way in which the product is going to flow, and here are the reasons why. Then the stakeholders are going to weigh in. They're going to say, well, I don't believe it should work this way because X, Y, Z. And then what will come from that is then you will kind of try and synthesize the criticism with your original material and pass it back. Sorry, just hold on, Tanya. I'm just going to go grab a power cable for my laptop. Just hold on. Okay. All right. Okay. So coming back to Tanya's question, experience in the field, and sometimes I don't have experiences or references to comment on. Okay, so I think that's a very fair point. However, what I would say is that one of the great benefits of user experience is, or indeed any subdiscipline of ergonomics or human factors, is we're all people. We've all used systems that have worked well for us, and we've used ones that haven't worked well for us. So just to look at my own experience this morning, I'm definitely going to go back and look at what was the journey that I went through in the YouTube live environment that made it so difficult for me to actually get done what I wanted to. So let me just show you. Maybe that's and so the reason I'm mentioning that is what you want to do is you basically want to use practical experiences from your own life of a user of a system and say, well, these are times that I've seen or experienced things working in a particular way. So let me just quickly bring up, let me share a screen here. Entire screen. Cool. So this is the system that I wanted to use this morning for sharing. So I would go, for instance, with this, and I would say video capture device, create new. Okay. And possibly we'd say window capture. New one, we choose a particular tab. Might choose Notepad. Okay, cool. There's my Notepad appearing and so on and so forth. Then I wanted to go start streaming. Okay. Hit start streaming, and then I got this pop-up. Just said failed to start streaming. I tried all sorts of things, got me very, very distressed. Let's unpack this actually as a perfect example. So we know nothing about UX, but let's explore what this means. So in the beginning, it says failed to start streaming. So that's no, I haven't been able to stream. Then there's this quite disconcerting big X. Now, one of the things that's interesting is we never think about this, but X means close. Here I've got a square red X with a white X in the middle. Here I have a circular X with a big white X in the middle. And if I click on that, nothing happens. Yet if I clicked on that, it would dismiss this window. That to me means that there's actually a logical inconsistency between the design language of these two things. One is telling me close, one is warning me. So this is actually already a case of bad design. Then it says starting the output failed. Okay, what the hell is the output? Does that mean the stream? Maybe, maybe not. Please check for details. All right, so now I know there's this thing called a log, but I have no idea where it is, okay? But I know that apparently if I check it, something's going to happen. Then it says note, NVENC, or make sure your video drivers are up to date. Now, I subsequently went pulled some bloatware from NVIDIA to try and update my drivers, and that's what I spent the last half hour doing and caused all these problems this morning. So that's a bit of a nothing burger, right? Now that really hasn't helped. Now if I go and start looking around, I'm like, oh, well, what is this log thing? So no file, nothing under log, edits, nothing under log, view, nothing under log, profile, scene, tools, nothing. Help, oh, log files, okay. Show log files. Okay, now I open this up. What happens? Okay, now I'm just dropped into some folder, and there are a bunch of log files. Well, which one's the one that affected me? Well, I'm going to presume it's this one. So I open it up, and now it's all in some sort of very gobbledygook. I mean, already at this point, many users would be kind of scared. Okay, now I start reading through the thing. What does it tell me? Blah, blah, blah. Failed to open up codec, generic error in external library. This means nothing to me. Close it. Bad piece of software, bad design. So now just coming back to your question here. Too technical. Okay, so you're saying that I'm being too technical in this point because I'm gonna just explain something. It's all apropos to the point that I'm trying to make, and that is, Tanya, that the important thing to note is that the experience that you need to use to comment on can simply be your impression until you build up enough experience of impressions to feel comfortable proceeding. So in terms of experience, I think you've just got to kind of take the experience that you have and try and apply it as best you can. In terms of references to comment on, I think what you should do is you should try and read as much as you can. So one absolutely wonderful thing to look at So I'm going to just give you a couple of links to consider. One is I encourage you to read as much as you can of A List Apart. The other thing I think you should consider reading is, and for the designers, they'll be very familiar with some of these magazines, but some of these online magazines, but they're useful to read. So these are good for just kind of learning general context. So Smashing Magazine is a good source of content. And the Nielsen Norman Group has absolutely fantastic sets of research and articles that you can read, reports, etc. So if we go, thanks, Ahir. I think that's absolutely the correct point. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to focus on the technical nature. I'm in fact trying to highlight how, if I'm a fairly technical person, I've been building software for 20 years. If I enter a user experience with YouTube or with some streaming software, and the experience that I'm engaging with is confusing to me, then yes, you're right. It is too technical for the average user. The question would be, I ended up having to use that because YouTube encourages me to use those tools to do it. So the thing is, if you've got someone who's worked with software for 30 years, since he was 5 years old, wrote his first program, and he's been an internet native since 1992, and he's worked and he's used the software before successfully, then the question should be, how does a UX process become so difficult? But so I think, Dennis, I think we're agreeing on that point. But just coming back to what Tanya highlighted in terms of getting comfortable with things to read. So really what you want to do is you want to try and build out as much experience as you can. Some great reports here to read as well, Tanya. The other thing is, and I think you're going to build up this experience with time, is once we start doing the research modules and we start doing and we start reading through and start working with studying users themselves, then I think it's going to be a lot easier to get comfortable with those things. The other thing that I strongly want to encourage you to look at reading and understanding is human interface guidelines. So this is a bit of a dry area generally, but it is where basically the thought process of particular interfaces have been outlined and been explained in a lot of detail. So let's send you a link here. So I'm going to send you a link to iOS, and it'll give you a little bit of a flavor for a set of human interface guidelines. So that one's for Apple's 3D Touch. It also looks at like audio, authentication, data entry, drag and drop, feedback, file handling, gestures, near field communication. Just sort of explains like principles of design, principles of how a human should interact with the software, looking at systems capabilities, visual design, icons and images, bars, views, etc. With Android, let's go to human interface guidelines. These are often called design languages. So I mean, a very famous one from Google is Material Design Language. And essentially, Tanya, those are the things that you're going to want to read and get comfortable with a lot of the different ideas. The other thing is to look at things like UX patterns. It's a great website to just unpack. So I don't know if this has been much help, Tanya, but if you take these links that I've sent through here and you read through them, like ui-patterns.com, developer.android.com/design, and so on and so forth, I think you're going to put yourself in a much better position to have things to refer to. The other references that you need to look for in the small group forums is just referring to your colleagues. I mean, if you think about it, what are we trying to practice? We're trying to practice that thing that happens when you yourself are going to be in a meeting or in a discussion, whether it's a Skype or a phone call or a face-to-face meeting with a client, where you're going to say something like, I'd like to put this button here, or I think this should be a drop-down, and here's why. And the here's why is the thing you need to refer. So if we take something like a drop-down and we say, well, the classic example is people putting a yes/no into a drop-down, which could far better be represented with a checkbox, which is something called a Boolean, but essentially like a true-false switch. So either a true on-off toggle or a checkbox. Those are far better ways of representing those two things. So if you're in a meeting and you have decided, okay, cool, the question is, the user interface has got a field going, do you want to subscribe to notifications or notifications? And then there's a toggle, yes, no. And then the customer or someone says, well, why isn't that a drop-down? Then you can say, well, the information there it's binary. There's only going to be two, and therefore I only need to have a toggle. If we believe that there's going to be something for notifications other than yes or no, so let's say I might have yes, send me all full notifications, partial or priority notifications, and none, then I probably need to move that into a drop-down or into a picker and not have it as a toggle. So those are the kind of things, I mean, I don't know if I'm really helping, but what you're trying to do is you are trying to just describe what makes sense to you as a user. And I suppose it's a thing like taste, where you're not born with taste. You actually have to learn it, and you learn it by looking at what works and what doesn't work. So let me find one. There's some more I can actually share with you guys here. And it's quite nice. You can go and look at here's a game that you could actually play. Oh, sorry, my cat has a tendency to like to walk over my laptop, so I apologize if I'm going to send you guys a link, and this is a game that you can play. So it's bedesigntheweb.com. It basically shows you a UX pattern, shows your wireframe, and you need to see whether or not you can guess which website it is. And I think, Tanya, you'll be surprised at how many of the websites that you might think that you don't know, once you start looking at I'm just playing it myself here, actually. Once you start looking at the wireframes, it'll actually become quite apparent, and you'll see that the essence of what you're needing to look at is quite defined and quite easy to determine. Cool. Are there any other questions, or shall we call it there? I'm going to try and figure out a way to do this a little bit better, where you guys can see me on screen as well, and we can collaborate a little bit more effectively. Thank you very much for bearing with me through that bit of a palaver. I'm normally quite punctilious about getting these things done right, and so I apologize if I was a little bit frustrated early on. Certainly, it's not my style at all. So yeah, just let me know if you've got any other questions, and thank you for participating in this and asking the questions that you have done. Yeah, I hope to have a little bit of a cleaner version of this next week. And thank you very much.